To talk more about the scourge of GBV in South Africa and the recently ended 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, we're now joined virtually by Phinah Kodisang, the CEO of Soul City Institute. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us and a warm welcome to the late edition.
Thank you, Simpiwe. Good evening to everyone.
Now, first of all, the 16 Days of Activism campaign ends every year with powerful speeches, marches and commitments, but South Africa still records some of the highest GBV rates in the world. So from Soul City's research and community work, has this campaign actually reduced violence, or has it become a ritual of outrage with limited consequences?
Thanks for that question. I think as Soul City, we've always been saying 16 days is not enough. One, to call out abuse, to create awareness, to prevent. You know, what's happening with the other 349 days. We can't just leave everything to the 16 days. So we need to move away from putting a lot of effort in the 16 days. Rather, the 16 days should be where we come and account as communities, as government, as civil society. The 16 days should be where we give each other an account of what have we been doing throughout the 349 days to prevent violence, to educate, to create awareness. Otherwise, we then see that in the 16 days, which is, you know, a period where you have two other days, World AIDS Day and International Human Rights. So the focus is also divided within the 16 days, right? Because when it's the 1st of December, we are now talking HIV. When it's the 10th, we are now talking international human rights.
Yeah.
So we need to move away from just making it an event, but actually using the 349 days to educate, to be accountable, to call out abuse, and to make sure that everyone knows that it's their responsibility. It can't be left to government alone. We are equally responsible for making sure that we create safe communities, we create safe homes, because a lot of violence happens in intimate spaces.
Ms. Kodisang, what hard indicators should South Africans be looking at, to judge whether this campaign is working or not? Could it be fewer murders, faster convictions, safer homes? Or are we still measuring success by hashtags and events?
Eventing is something we do, and I believe we have not learned, because no one event can actually change behavior. If anything, that day becomes about the entertainment that we have on the day, because the nature of events is that you'll have speeches, then you'll have entertainment. Hence, I'm saying we are rather calling for 369 days.
Yes.
Every day should be an awareness creation day. Every day should be a day where we take stock of where things are, right? We need to measure the behavior that changes. We need to change the norms in our communities. This silence that we have normalized, where if a woman is screaming, asking for help, no one steps in because we don't want to be involved in relationship issues. We don't want to involve ourselves because, hey, what did she do to provoke him?
Right.
Those are things that people ask, right? And so we need to move away from that. Hence, I'm saying the call should be not what is government doing, but what is all of us, including government, doing to make sure we don't hear these numbers that we are hearing. We don't hear these cases that you've just mentioned just now.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And, so diabolical, so dire is the situation right now that gender-based violence has been described as South Africa's second pandemic. But unlike COVID, there is no vaccine, but there are laws. Why, in your view, then, Ms. Kodisang, has violence against women remained so stubbornly high despite progressive legislation?
It's because people are involved.
Yep.
The law is very clear, right? The law is there, and it's people, again, who needs to implement the law, right? So if police who know the law can also go and violate the very same law they need to uphold, it tells you that at the level of human beings, we are not yet educated enough to turn our behaviors. There's a lot of impunity in our country because we've seen it not, gender-based violence not being punished enough. So all of us believe I can get away with it. I've seen it, I've seen other people get away with it. So it's at the level of human beings making sure that they hold themselves accountable, because any law is as good as the people who uphold it, right? So if we are not upholding the law, it remains something that is beautiful on paper, something that is progressive, but if it's not implemented and there's no one who's enforcing it, it won't move, it won't change.
And I want to take you back to, that cultural nuances that you made mention earlier, with regards to people will not entertain or intervene in a gender-based violence case because, it's so to speak. But how much of this crisis is really about crime, and how much of it is it about power, about masculinity, deeply entrenched patriarchy that our own interventions are still too afraid to confront head-on?
Very true. Everything in society starts with what has society accepted as a norm. So violence against women is something that society doesn't speak loudly against, only a handful, right? You'll find that it's mainly women who are saying enough is enough. Where men are allies, it's not enough men. At the level of our relationships, men are not calling each other out to say, you can't mix with us as a man who abuses a woman, because that would mean we are creating an enabling environment for you. So there are no social sanctions against men who abuse in communities. If anything, we problematize women. They are too loud. That is why the men beat her. She was wearing a miniskirt. That's why she was raped. She didn't do what she's supposed to do as a woman. That is why she's being punished. So everything is left to interpretation of individuals and societies up to their tolerance level. If they tolerate it enough, it continues. If there's no tolerance, we then see action. But it can't be left to people to decide whether or not they will act. It must be enforced through law, but also through changing our cultural and gender norms in communities. In fact, I want to make an example because you mentioned Kuruman. We were recently in Tabazimbi where men were having conversations during the 16 days. And one of the conversations that was very interesting for me was when a young man gave an example and said, if I buy a woman alcohol at a tavern, she must know that she's mine, she belongs to me. Yeah. And the question is, where is consent in that, right? Does she know that by virtue of receiving that alcohol from you, she has sold herself to you? And what happens if she drinks it and says no? What are you going to do? Right. So boundaries, consent is something that is very gray, and we are not teaching men, boys, women as well to know where the boundaries are in terms of a consent that can be given and withdrawn anytime.
All right, Ms. Kodisang, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Great chatting to you. And I agree with you again that this needs to be a 365-year, long conversation, not just confined to 16 days, because we need to extend it to check or to see whether we've overinvested in criminal justice responses while underinvesting in prevention and social norms change. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, that conversation with Phinah Kodisang, the CEO of the Soul City Institute, reminds us that while the 16 days of activism may have ended, but South Africa's gender-based violence crisis has not. GBV is rooted in deep patriarchy, inequality, harmful social norms, and sustained by gaps between strong laws and weak implementation.